Is the Google UX course still worth it in 2024? I took the entire course myself, took notes, asked people, and re-evaluated it again after 2 years. The answer is yes, but. So let's talk about that but. The certificate you get at the end of it is worthless. If you're taking it just for the certificate, don't bother, it's a waste of time. Over 850,000 people signed up for the course already, but the last segment of it, segment number 7, was only rated by about 2,000 people. That is a huge drop, which means that most people just gave up after the first segment. The course gives you the basics, but it's not enough for you to really be a designer after you complete it, not even at a junior level. These skills are simply not employable yet. You need a lot more to get to that point. It's just the starting point of your UX journey to then learn from other sources, including mine. That said, until I release my very own UX course and about that, then this is the best choice for you to start your UX journey with right now. It's also one of the most affordable, and they do offer scholarships for developing countries, so just do your research about that. Let me share a couple more key points here quickly, and then I'll cover them in every segment in a lot more detail. So how up to date is it? It did have some updates over the years, but segment 6 still teaches you how to design in Adobe XD, an app that was discontinued a couple months ago, so it's not even a real thing that you should be learning anymore, and it's still there in the course. So you need to keep in mind that this course was mostly done 3 to 4 years ago. Also, the economy was a little bit different because back then everybody was hiring and the economy was booming, and then, some stuff happened and now it seems to be the opposite. Google alone has fired a lot of people from their company. So all those claims on the course website about this being a very in-demand job aren't really as accurate as well. The course is also peer graded, which means that no industry professionals are going to be looking over your projects. That also means that most of the feedback you will get after uploading your assignments is gonna be pretty worthless. And a lot of people are cheating. So they'll just upload a PDF as their assignment that has nothing inside them except for a word or two saying how you should just give them the full score. Many things are also done the Google way in this course, and they are taught the Google way, which isn't exactly the same way everybody in the industry does things. So once you learn from this course, it's really good to take a step back and gain some perspective about how some of these things just work in general. The UI part, which is segment 5, is the weakest one of the entire course. I actually recommend to a lot of people to just take segments 1 through 4 and then take one of my UI courses to really gain those UI skills on top of that. But obviously, if you're a completionist, then go ahead and do the entire course. If you skip segments 5, 6, and 7 though, you're just gonna get to a much more employable position a lot faster. This video includes all 7 individual reviews of every single segment of the Google course, and I took every single one, so I talk about them in great detail. Chapters are added so you can bookmark this video and come back to it as you progress through the Google UX course. As I mentioned before, some things have been updated, like the non-accessible orange button in the UI part of the Google course. Most of the course, though, has stayed exactly the same. Let's begin by going back in time and starting with the very first segment of the Google UX course. This is the segment that most people took, and then most people have quit after that.
Hey friends, so I've been asked this question a lot. Mike, can you recommend a good UX course for beginners? And up until now, I could only say that not really. So naturally now, when Google made their own course on UX design, I decided to give it a try because, well, it's Google, right? So it has to be pretty good quality. And I've been a designer for over 22 years now, so I didn't really learn a lot from the course, but my goal for this wasn't really to learn. My goal was to evaluate the course so I can let you guys know if it's worth it or not. But halfway through the fundamentals, I realized that my experience can actually give me a bit of a bias towards the course. Because I've been doing this for so long, a lot of the concepts that they're mentioning aren't really that new to me, so it can get pretty boring. So I spoke with two other people, Magda and Daniel, and they are just learning, they're just starting their journey to become a UX designer. So I think that their feedback combined with mine should give you more of a perspective if the course is even for you. And normally people do this at the end of the video, but if you want a too long didn't watch version, here it is. I believe that this course is actually quite good. It has some issues, and those issues can actually influence your future work, so it's important to know about them and to actually take them into account when starting the course. So let's start with something very high level here. Before starting the course, you need to be aware that this is a course by Google, which means that this course is done in a very certain way that is gonna be making future Google employees. And if you don't want to work for Google, or if you're planning to work on an agile startup or building your own company, there are some things that are gonna be done in a very Google way, and you might have to relearn them or just get a different perspective on them. But that's something that was to be accepted from the start. So the knowledge here is really good, and you can adjust the things that you learn to another work scenario later. It will require a little bit of extra learning, but you'll have a solid foundation to build on. And here's an example of something like that. While going through different design roles, they mention something like this. There are also visual designers who focus on how a product or technology looks. They might be responsible for designing logos, illustrations, or icons. And this is a good example of how Google is trying to teach you their own ways, because visual designers are mostly UI designers. And of course there are also graphic designers, and these are the people that are making the logos and the illustrations, while UI designers are actually the people who are working on how the product looks. So just this one thing is showing that if you're gonna apply for a UI/UX design role, there is really nothing about UI design mentioned in the fundamentals of the course. It's just called visual design, and this is a little bit different than what the rest of the industry is calling it. I liked, however, that they are also mentioning a trend of simplification of UX roles that has been happening for a couple of years now, and I've been mentioning this for over 3 years, and initially I was faced with a lot of negative feedback, and now we see Google actually saying that I was right. So what they mention is that there's 3 main roles in the UX world: UX researchers, UX designers, and UX writers. So that basically means that if you're a designer, you're responsible for the actual design. So the trend of 2009 and a little bit later of designers who don't do any design, just talk, is going to be a thing of the past, and it's good that they acknowledge it. The structure of the course is pretty simple. So you have videos, you have some reading material, and you have quizzes and writing assignments. And the good thing about the videos is that they are pretty short, so it's easy to actually digest everything in smaller chunks. And I really like the fact that you can play them at double the speed. Most videos are also paused about halfway through with a quick 1-question quiz, and this is a good way to actually memorize something that they said in the video, but in many cases it's actually pretty weird because they are asking you for something that they just said like 5 seconds ago. And what I also really liked is the instructors, especially Michael, who is the lead on this course.
My name is Michael.
He speaks in a very clear and fun to listen to way, and I think this is important because you'll be listening to him the most in the fundamentals. And if you're doing this course as a beginner UX designer, chances are that you've already seen some of the UX memes, and Google understands that and they actually use some of them in the course. And while this is not really a bad approach in general because it gives you some familiarity with the concepts that they're mentioning, some of those examples aren't really that great because they use the very overused UX versus UI ketchup bottle example, in which they say that the plastic bottle, you can squeeze it so the ketchup is a lot easier to apply. And that is a better user experience compared to hitting the glass bottle on the bottom to get the ketchup out. And while this is technically true, there is another thing to consider here that I talked about in a previous video, which is that If you're using a plastic bottle, you're also eating microplastics, which is not really good for your health in the long run, so your long-term user experience might actually be better with a glass bottle. Okay, let's talk about the bad things about the course. I found a couple of them, and one of them is actually very major, and two are not as major, but you should still be aware of them before taking the course. So the first problem that I see is that Google is using their own naming conventions for things. And UX is a very weird industry in which a lot of the naming conventions actually differ from company to company. So sometimes a name for something that they mention, if you try searching for it, you'll realize that it has a couple of different names, and it can create a little bit of a mess and make it harder for you to find what you're looking for. And of course, it's just the name. The processes have all the same steps, it's just some of the names are different between them. You want an example? Search for user-centered design in Google and then filter it by images. And as you can see, the flow of this UX approach is practically the same in all of these, but the names of individual steps can differ depending on which company produced the infographic. So Google just uses one and never mentions the possible other naming conventions. The other thing that I notice is that the initial part of the course is a little bit less polished than the rest of it, but it does pick up later, so if you're discouraged by the beginning, just stick to it and it's gonna get better. I did facepalm a couple of times during that very first initial stage, and one of those facepalms is a very early exercise that they give you. They show you two apps to compare them and to figure out which one is better. This is a very good exercise, just comparing two different approaches to things. But the problem I have with this, that the bad example or the bad app that they chose, it's so bad it's just comical. It's just exaggerated to an extreme where it's not really easy to compare with any logical thinking or any good UX approach, because one of them is like a pretty standard mobile app and the other one is like a chaotic mess. The biggest problem with this course, however, is not really Google's. I think the biggest problem and the biggest issue that most people find about the Google UX course is the horrible UX of Coursera, which is the provider of the platform. Here is an example. So here's an example of an iframe with two scroll bars, and once you start scrolling the form, at some point you're gonna see a progress bar, and at that point you might stop scrolling, but then you'll realize that there is a button underneath that you need to push to actually proceed. Because naturally at this stage I would assume that I should just click on the mark as completed, but no, I need to scroll down and click next. And once you get through the entire form and you click on done, there is another window with a done button that's inactive, so clicking on it doesn't do anything at all. Mark as complete doesn't do anything either, except for maybe mark it as complete, and then you just have to click this little next link on the top right that's barely visible. And I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy to create a platform from scratch or to rebuild a platform that somebody else has made to have good UX. But if you're Google and if you're trying to teach people UX, I think you should do better. They certainly do have the resources to actually create a learning platform themselves, just for their own course. And the main problem with this is that the bad UX of the platform, combined with the fact that this is Google, can actually make a sort of false impression on those junior people, those junior designers learning to be a UX designer, that this is good or that this is good enough. And no, it's really not. Things like that should be avoided, and things like that are very far from good UX. So looking at it from the perspective of my 20 years of experience in design, I can't say that I really learned a lot from this course, but that's to be expected. I finished it in a little over a day, playing most of the videos at double the speed, but my perspective is a little bit distorted by all that experience. So as a true UX person, I decided to actually do some research here, and I spoke to Magda and Daniel, who are just starting as designers, and for them, this course is a completely different experience than it is for me. So their feedback is actually more aligned with what the target audience of this course should be thinking about. So this is what Magda said. I found the course to be quite interesting. They introduce new concepts one by one with examples that are sometimes good and sometimes not that great. I think for a beginner, the course is a good fit. It shows where UX is heading and what future problems we'll be solving, like the next billion users and their problems. And I think that this course focuses a bit too much on creating global experiences because Google is global. And in reality, most designers work on creating products for specific markets, so pretty local. I like the course structure with videos, reading and discussions with plenty of links to extra reading and diving deeper. And she also mentioned the UX of Coursera, so this is not just my thing, even junior designers are noticing it, which basically means that this is something that should be fixed right away. And she also said that some of the quizzes and some of the exercises were a little bit too easy and not challenging enough. Daniel actually explored UX as a hobby for some time now, so he didn't start from the very beginning. But for him, the outlook of this course wasn't really that he's gonna become a UX designer because of finishing the course. It was more about structuring the knowledge that he has and filling the gaps. He also pragmatically understands that having this certificate and a nice portfolio is gonna make it easier for recruiters to make an informed decision. So that's a win. What he liked the most about the course is the clear structure of it, so how videos and text and extra reading intersect, and how they all complement each other to make a much fuller learning experience. He also said that it's really good that you can go at your own pace, so you can go faster on some easier topics and then slow down on some more difficult ones. He also believes that the price is pretty good for the scope and size of the course, because it's actually a lot cheaper than most UX courses out there right now. He also said that the Coursera interface is pretty bad, so nothing new here. And he also noted that this is a Google course, so it's kind of really skewed in the direction of working for Google in the long run, and it's not necessarily reflecting the entire UX world or UX community. And he said that the idea of interacting with other students in the forums is a pretty good one, but most of the discussions were just one-word answers that didn't really contribute too much. So should you take it? If you're just starting, you want to learn what UX is, get the fundamentals, and then be able to explore on your own, I think this course is for you. It's pretty good. It's also relatively cheap, and if you're struggling financially, you can get grants or scholarships to actually help you pay for it. So the knowledge is there. It's pretty good, it's very well structured, and it's delivered in a very nice and friendly way.
My name is Michael.
And I only finished the foundation, which is the very first beginner chapter of the 7 main courses that Google prepared. So if you want me to cover other parts of this, let me know in the comments. And also if you finished this course or you're thinking about taking it, let me know in the comments what are your thoughts and what you're most afraid of or what you're expecting. And as usual, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next one. Cheers! Hey, welcome back to my review of the Google UX course. This is gonna be part 2 of 7. But before we begin, let me ask one of the most common questions that I got after the first video. Is this course gonna be enough for me to land my first job as a UX designer right after I finish it? So my answer here is unlikely. Of course, this is gonna give you a solid foundation and it's gonna give you some experience, but it's not gonna be enough to actually get your first job right away, unless you're like very lucky. So if you finish the course, get the certificate, get the knowledge, it will be enough to help you understand UX better and have a solid foundation on which you can build on your own. So that's gonna mean a lot of reading, a lot of extra research of your own, and a lot of portfolio projects that you're gonna make. Because if you're only gonna use the 2 or 3 portfolio projects that you'll have after this course is done, then in the eyes of most employers, you're gonna look like you're lazy. So yeah, a solid foundation, but the dedication and hard work is what's gonna get you the first job. And I am making a video on how to stand out from the crowd because, as you probably know, over 40,000 people are taking this course right now. So that's gonna mean that very soon there's gonna be 40,000 potential UX designers, junior UX designers, for employers to choose from. So standing out from that crowd is gonna be key. And I'm gonna tell you a couple of tricks that you can use, but that's gonna be another video. The second part of the course is all about user research. So it's gonna be all about personas, customer journeys, empathy maps, and more. You'll also learn a couple of ways to define the user's problems and come up with a solution. So far sounds pretty good, right? And this time there are assignments that you have to finish and they're peer graded, so you have to upload them and wait for somebody to review them. And by actually doing the personas, user stories, user journey maps and all that, you're gonna have a very good base for your portfolio. because this is what most case studies in portfolios have. So it's gonna be a very nice way for you to actually start building your portfolio with some real things. And many employers actually reading case studies, they expect to see things that are gonna be in this part of the course. Also, all that knowledge is gonna be pretty useful if you're gonna be doing some personal projects and sometimes you don't have the ability to do any research on them, but you'll be able to actually create those personas and those user journeys on your own and have a much more thorough case study. So the course starts with picking an app idea from a randomly generated list. It's basically 2 sentences that kind of complement each other, so you kind of randomize them, but it's usually going to be an app that does something for some specific scenario or some specific place or business type. And they say there's thousands of choices. I just clicked randomized once and I got a timesheet app for a food truck in New York City, so I decided that I'm going to go with this. And the good thing is that once again, Google is making a clear separation between UX designers and UX researchers. And this is gonna be research for designers, so it's not gonna be like a super thorough, super complex research part. It's gonna be more aimed at understanding research enough so you can conduct it if you're working at a small company, or that you can talk to a UX researcher at your company without really using like a dictionary or something. So it's gonna help you communicate, but it's also gonna help you do some basic research yourself. And one thing that I noticed this time is that when Google is using their own specific naming conventions, this time they provide options of how this thing is called in other places. And that's really great because it makes it a lot easier for you to actually search for it. The questions during the videos are also a lot better this time because they're more difficult, and that's good because I think that this requires a lot more critical thinking and logical thinking than just kind of selecting what you remembered from a few seconds ago. They also talk about the sunk cost bias, which is something that happens so often that it's really important that you know about it. It's when you're designing something for so long that you feel so invested in it that you're overlooking the bad decisions and the bad directions that it's taking. So you're so invested that you're willing to kind of ignore some of that bad stuff because that would mean that you'd have to redesign it or redo it, and you don't really want to do it because you spent so much time. But in reality, if you continue doing that, you're basically going on a path of self-destruction because in the end, the project is gonna be killed off anyway, and you're gonna be wasting even more time. So it's really good to understand this problem and to be able to actually remove the bad design at any point, so don't get too attached to it. And I also noticed another cute thing about Coursera. So for privacy purposes, I use Safari, I never use Chrome, and there's this thing that keeps happening during the videos every now and then. The website says that it's using too much memory, and then it kind of reloads itself, and the video starts from the beginning. Reloads itself and the video starts from the beginning. Those videos are 720p, and this thing never happens on YouTube when I'm watching 4K videos. So it's definitely something with bad optimization or just bad design overall. So the main problem I have with this part of the course is the peer review. Because it sounds really well on paper, right? You're gonna review somebody else's work, so that way you're gonna learn how you can improve yours, and they're gonna review your work, so everybody wins and Google doesn't have to do a thing. But imagine one of these 2 hypothetical scenarios. The first one is that while you're grading somebody else's work, you have no idea if they are not looking at your work at the same time. So how would you grade them? Well, I would give them 100% every time because I would be afraid that if I give them less, they're gonna grade my work lower, and yeah. So there's not much learning here going on when everybody gets pretty much the same score, and I guess most people are gonna be that way. Because chances are that even if your work is not perfect, you're gonna get 100% anyway. And there's also this other scenario, because we're all learning here. So we have no idea if the person that's gonna be reviewing our work has a good grasp on this and if they even understand what they should be reviewing. So they can give you a lower score even if your assignment was perfect, and that's gonna be pretty unfair. So in both cases, it's either useless or a disaster. And since Google is trying to use this course to train their future employees, I believe that they should actually assign some people to grade those courses. And I know that there's a lot of work, a lot of extra work, but it would be a lot better if somebody with experience was actually grading them. Just my 2 cents. I know it's kind of fun to create personas and user stories and everything else, but the reality is that in most projects and in most cases, you're not gonna be doing personas at some point. So this is really good to understand how it works and how the thought process works. But after a few years in the industry, you're gonna be mentally skipping that step and kind of creating those personas in your head without the backstory, but mostly as user groups. This is an exercise that's good for juniors, but you need to be aware that in real world, you rarely ever make personas. And in my over 500 projects that I've done since '98, I think that we only did personas twice or maybe 3 times because the projects were so niche and so targeted towards a very specific audience that we had to do it. But in many cases, there's something that I'm probably going to record a video on. You design for the nerd and the noob, which basically means you design for somebody who has good control and good tech understanding, so they know how to use apps and websites, and then for the noob, which is somebody who doesn't have that understanding. And of course, this is pretty oversimplified, and I'll try to cover this in more detail in another video. Another funny thing that I found with the course is that they show you how accessibility works with input methods, which basically means that you should be able to navigate a form with just your keyboard, so you don't have to use the mouse. And this is great, and this is how forms should be designed always. But the problem here is that on Safari, you can't really use that form that way. So they show you that, okay, look at this. This is gonna be good practice, and just use tab to go between the fields. And it kind of works until you get to the checkbox, because you can never select that checkbox with the tab key, because normally you could go to the checkbox with the tab key, then press space to select it, then press tab to go to the button and enter to submit. But it doesn't work that way in this case. In this case, the form allows you to use tab to switch between the form fields, but you cannot select the checkbox without using your mouse. And if you try to use your mouse, it will allow you to click on that checkbox, but if you try to use it for anything else, it's just gonna show a ton of error messages. And also, this is pretty bad UX, because the form should be seamless, so you should be able to also transition between the mouse and the keyboard, especially if the keyboard just doesn't work. So yeah, their intentions were pure, but this is not how you design a good form. Okay, and here's one more little thing, and I know this is being picky and it doesn't really affect the quality of the knowledge there, but I am picky, and I think that in design we should be really paying attention to the smallest of details, because subconsciously our users or our customers are gonna notice that, and they're gonna feel like something is not quite right, not quite polished. So there is this monitor behind the teacher there, and sometimes they show some stuff on it, but in some cases they just do a crude overlay of text that's not in perspective, and it really shows. You can see it here. The text is kind of placed front and center while the monitor is at a little bit of an angle, and I think that this should really be done better. It's just a little bit lazy, and also our brain really likes perspective and likes to be able to predict where things should be. So if something is out of place like this, our mind is subconsciously treating it as a little bit worse. And it works the same with everything. So alignment and good typography and good hierarchy, these are all things that influence the decisions of your users and of your customers. So even if everything is kind of right, but it's a little bit off, their brains are gonna see that even if they don't see it. And it's gonna lower their perception of how good it is. Just like this little text on the monitor did for me. So yeah, little things matter. And I don't really want to do any spoilers here, so I'm not gonna talk about the precise things that they're teaching. I believe that the scope of this second part is really good, and it's gonna be really useful to understand research and do some basic research on your own as a designer. But as usual, you should always try to look at other sources and improve, because just using that knowledge is not gonna be enough. As I said before, the quizzes here are a little bit more challenging, and that's really good because the quizzes in the first part were so easy that you could actually finish them in like 2 minutes. And right now you sometimes really have to think, and some of the questions are quite tricky. And this is good because design can be tricky. I'm not a fan of the peer grading because I think that it's pretty useless. And the only good thing about it is that you can maybe see what other people did, but you could have done this with like a public version of those assignments anyway, because they're gonna be pretty similar to each other. And it's also great that this time Google is providing alternative names for some things. So you're gonna be able to search for them with their proper names or their more popular names and not just the way that Google is doing it. There is some stuff here that juniors have to make, but at some point you're gonna stop doing it, like personas. But there's also one thing that is really important, and they actually covered this in great detail. And this is competitive analysis. Because if you're working on a product, chances are that somebody else has made a similar thing before. Because nothing is really original anymore, right? Competitive analysis allows you to analyze what everybody else has done, to compile a report on what can be done better in your own product. And this is something that as designers at Hype4, we actually do it every single time. So if you were to take just one exercise as the most important part of the course, I believe realistically for like what the market wants or like smaller companies want and startups, I think this is gonna be it. So pay special attention to competitive analysis. And there's one more reason, especially at this stage, why you should pay special attention to it. Because if you're building your own portfolio and you're creating some simple apps and websites and designs, chances are you're not gonna have a lot to write in the case study because you probably didn't do any research, because how can you do research on a product that doesn't exist? You would need to source your users and do some surveys or some tests or whatever, and it's not easy. You could do some Twitter surveys and that's a good start, but the good thing is that if you do a competitive analysis of your portfolio project, you can actually analyze some real products and add it to the case study, and it's gonna make it look more full and more robust. So it's a great way to overcome the problem of many junior designers that don't really have a lot to talk about in their case studies. So do I recommend this course? Definitely yes. It's not perfect, but nothing is really perfect, but it's good enough for you to get the foundation to understand research, to either pursue the research career and learn more about that, or have enough knowledge to communicate with researchers well and understand your design decisions and maybe improve your design process a little bit as well. So I totally recommend it, but you need to be aware that it's not gonna be enough. Because if you want to stand out and if you want to truly understand research, you need to start doing it, not only reading about it and doing some simple exercises to get a certificate. So you need to really put in a lot of work, especially now when there's gonna be like 40,000 people with a similar skill set coming onto the job market very soon. Thanks for getting this far, and leave a comment or a like if you liked this video and subscribe if you haven't, and I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Cheers! Hey friends, welcome to the third part of the Google UX course review. But let's start with a joke, cause Coursera, the platform that the Google course is on, never ceases to amaze me. This time I decided to switch devices, so I decided to actually use this course on my iPad Pro. And all the quizzes have black text on like a very dark gray background. So they're impossible to read basically. But what's even funnier, the first time I encountered that was a question about how accessibility is affecting UX design. So I guess the jokes write themselves, right? But back to the course. Part 3 is all about wireframes and low fidelity prototypes. And this time the difficulty is actually much higher than in the previous parts of the course. And this actually shows because in the first part of the course, the foundation, there used to be like 30,000 people in the assignments and in the forums, and right now in part 3, when it's a lot more difficult and it takes a lot more time to complete these assignments, there's like 300 to 400 people only. So there is a huge drop-off after the first part of the course. And what it also means that because there is less people, it's usually gonna take a lot longer for your assignment to get reviewed by your peers. But this is actually good news, because if there is less people at the end of the course, that means that there's gonna be a much larger chance for you to actually get hired as a UX designer by some companies. Because I was initially expecting that there's gonna be like 40,000 new designers, but apparently most people don't have it in them to actually commit as much, especially when they see those harder exercises and when they realize that they need to put in a lot more time to finish them. And this time I wanted to approach this course from a slightly different perspective. Because at first I tried to look at it as a way for complete beginners to become UX designers, and we've already established that it worked for that pretty well. But let's assume that you've been in this industry for 2 or 3 years and you've done some projects, you've done some wireframes, some prototypes already, so you know your stuff. And what if you just want the certificate? Is this course gonna be difficult or challenging for you, or can you maybe finish it very quickly? Well, apparently to finish the third part of the course, all you have to do is finish the 3 assignments, the peer graded ones. And of course they are difficult to make, they take some time to make, and they're not really something that you can finish in 15 minutes. But if you just finish those 3 assignments, you don't have to watch any of the videos and read any of the extra materials, and you don't even have to pass any of the quizzes, and you'll still have 100% grade at the end of the course. And I don't know if it's a bug of Coursera or if it's on purpose, but in general, those 3 assignments were supposed to test your knowledge of wireframing and prototyping. So if you passed them, I guess that means that you passed the course. And of course, to test that, I just went in and I first did the assignment. So I watched no videos and I read no additional materials, additional information. I just went to the final part of the course and decided to just take on the assignment, then the second one, and then the third one. And it took me about an hour to finish storyboarding low fidelity wireframes and then converting them into a Figma prototype. So all of that took about an hour, and if it's gonna take 2 hours even, it's still fine to finish the course and get a grade. And of course, if you've never done design, the difficulty level here is gonna be a little bit too big for you to just finish the assignment, so you'll have to actually watch the videos and learn how to finish them. But if you've done some wireframing or some prototyping, it's gonna be pretty easy for you. Okay, now let's go into some minor things before we wrap it up. So I found some little bugs or problems, like they mentioned that you can use the shift key in Figma to draw straight lines and then the line is gonna just straighten itself. But then they mentioned that you can't really use that shift key to draw diagonal lines, which is not true, because if you hold the shift key, you'll be able to also draw 45-degree lines. So I think that they meant something else by that and then they just left it in. Another weird feature is how the peer graded exercises have the highest score first at the top and then at the bottom of the list. So if you're grading them, you have those radio buttons. In one of the quizzes, the high score or the passing score is at the top, and then in the next quiz, it's at the bottom. And I don't think that they should randomize that, because it's not a quiz of like your experience or your knowledge. It's about helping you to quickly assess what somebody else did. So those numbers, the high numbers or the high values, should be always at the same spot, either at the top or at the bottom. And switching it up like that is just pointless. The explanation on how to do wireframing and prototyping is quite good. They even mentioned some basic Gestalt principles, which are very helpful and actually are the basis of creating good hierarchy in your designs. So this is something you should pay special attention to if you have never done any designing. And also they show you how to move rectangles around, and basically that's gonna be most of what you'll be doing as a designer in the future. So that's good. That's some experience that's gonna be actually useful. If you want to learn to finally design, part 3 is gonna be all about that. It's gonna be very practical experience, very hands-on, but also it's a little bit more difficult and it's gonna take a little bit longer for you to complete those assignments. And while this is completely understandable from the start and even to be expected, the app that you're gonna be designing is going to be using Android patterns, because it's Google, right? They're teaching you how to design an app for their own operating system. And I don't really think that they mention iOS that much in this entire course, and that it has some different patterns. So if you want to be flexible and design for all the patterns and have a portfolio that shows multiple skills, you might have to do some iOS apps after this course, because they're not gonna be here. And of course, the best portfolios are the ones that have multiple different projects. So web ones, Android ones, iOS ones, tablet ones as well. So the more different types of devices that you cover in your portfolio, the better. And here they only focus on Android. Okay, so what do I think about the third part of the course? Well, I think it's pretty good. You still need to keep in mind that you're gonna have to actually do a lot of extra work after you finish this course to build up a portfolio that's gonna be valuable. But it's a great start, and it's a great start into the practical side of designing. So this is gonna be practical, this is gonna be more useful, but at the same time, it's gonna be more challenging. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to be aware that a lot less people are actually in this part of the course. Probably because it's so challenging and people aren't really that motivated anymore. And many of the people who got the first certificate from the foundation, they think that's gonna be enough. And I think right now that the value of like the final certificate that you're gonna get if you finish all 7 is actually gonna be pretty high. So if you're going through the course, I think that this certificate is actually gonna be worth something, at least for a couple of months before more people pick it up. And if you've been designing for a year or 2, there are chances that you can finish the assignments without actually going through the course and get this part of the course certificate a lot faster. So that's it for me. As usual, do the course if you want to be a UX designer, but be sure to also do some extra work on the side. Alright, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you're taking this course or if you plan to finish it and what are your thoughts on it already. Cheers! Hey friends, it's Monday again and it's time for the 4th part of the Google UX course review. And as usual, I've done all the exercises and I finished the course, so my review is actually based on doing the course and not just quickly skimming through it. This time the theme is all about conducting user research based on the wireframes and the interactive prototypes that we did in part 3 of the course. Now, I think I've said everything about how bad the UX of Coursera really is in all of the previous videos, so just a reminder if you're new to this course or to this review, don't think that because Google is using a platform for their UX course that the platform automatically has good UX. Don't assume any of the patterns you see on Coursera are good UX because there mostly just aren't. So yeah, don't get inspired. Okay, back to the course. I like that there's a natural progression between all the sections from part 2 up until now, that you've been doing the initial planning, then the initial wireframes, very preliminary designs, a prototype, and now it's time to see how you can test that prototype to actually be able to see if it makes sense or if you should adjust it or if the project itself doesn't make any sense at all. But now it's time for a little disclaimer, because of course Google is doing this course to be making new Google employees and using patterns that are very true for big corporations, but in the real world, most companies that you're probably gonna apply to are medium and small, and some of these processes don't really work the same way in those companies, mostly because they don't really have the budget to do research on every step of the way. And of course that would be an ideal scenario, that would be just awesome, and this is something we should all strive for, but you can't really go over the lack of money. So the smaller businesses usually conduct research as they go. They quickly test a minimum viable product or a prototype, but then they go quickly to release to market as fast as possible, and then they adjust it as they go with real data and testing on real users. In reality, if you're thinking that as a UX designer you'll be doing research a lot, then it's not really the case, especially in smaller companies. So of course in the big corporations there are dedicated research teams and they're researching everything. But in reality, what you're gonna be doing is actually building those prototypes, building those wireframes, building those flows and those high fidelity designs especially, and testing on them will be done a lot of times after they actually launch to the public. But it also means that if you love research and you think that research is gonna be the main thing that's attracting you to UX design and you really want to be a researcher, then in your job search you should be focusing on bigger companies because they mostly have the budgets to do proper research, many rounds of it, and many types of it even in one project. So if you're research oriented, just avoid smaller companies because in many cases they simply won't be doing enough of it to keep you interested. So yeah, welcome to the real world.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
It's important to note that the difficulty level goes up again and pretty significantly. So the last one, the 3rd part, I actually did all the exercises in about an hour. This time it took me 2 hours to complete all 4 peer graded exercises, submit them, and be done with this practical part of the course. Then of course I went back and watched all the videos and read all the materials to be sure that they communicate it all in a clear, accessible and understandable way. And I have to say that this time I don't really have a lot of problems with any of the material. It's still very Google, so if you're aware of that and you're ready to take into account that for some smaller companies you might actually have to strip parts of these processes away completely, you should be fine. Just remember that you still need to learn a little bit on the side because Google only covers a specific way of doing things. Not every company is actually doing them that way. And if you're very new to this course, like just started with the Google Foundation and never had any UX experience before, I think that this part of the course, part 4, is actually likely gonna take you about a month to complete, because this is really more difficult, more time consuming, and to do it right and to have a proper portfolio at the end of it, you really need to commit to that. Peer grading, as usual, is a horrible idea, and I've said in the previous videos that I believe that Google should hire somebody from their company to actually grade those assignments, even if the courses were more expensive in the end, because the result would be just a lot better. But luckily this time I haven't encountered any kind of cheating, so all the assignments that I had to grade were actually very thought out, very precise, and people actually, I could see that they've put the time and effort, and many of them were so big and so robust that it shows that it took them probably days to complete those. And it's really nice to see that. It's really nice to see that dedication and ambition that people put into the course. So let's hope the cheaters are not gonna destroy it for them. But all of that difficulty increase leads to an even bigger drop-off. Remember how we all started at about 30,000 people, and then in course number 3 it went down to like 300 to 400? Well, right now it's about 100 people actively taking part of the course and talking on the forums. And that also means that after I uploaded my assignments, it took about 8 hours for all of them to be graded, and in many cases I didn't really have any assignments to grade myself because I still had to wait for people to complete theirs. So bottom line, if you're a beginner and you've gotten this far, congratulations, because this is really getting difficult, and this is really getting to a point where you need to be very motivated to continue. Just remember to learn a lot outside the course and continue your educational journey here, because this course is not enough to be a versatile designer that you could work in practically every company. And if you're a mid-level designer and you already know your stuff, then this course should be a little bit more difficult, but still pretty easy to complete. You only need to complete the 4 peer-graded assignments. They took me 2 hours, but if you're mid-level, that might take you about 8 to 10 hours to complete the entire course, but still it's gonna be a lot faster. You can probably do it in a day, like a full day, than the month that it actually takes the beginners. And looking back from course number 4 back to course number 1 and 2, and how I thought about these courses and what the certificate is gonna be worth, I think that right now the certificate is only going to be worth something if you have that portfolio as well. So if you could show the entire process, like you were assigned an app in course number 2, and then you did all the wireframes, all the research and all the prototypes and everything, and wrote a dedicated detailed case study about it, then this, combined with the certificate, will actually hold some weight with the recruiters. But if you just show the certificate, I think most of them will actually think that you cheated your way through. So remember to do that portfolio project, because everybody in the industry, when they're hiring somebody, the portfolio is 99% of the success here. So if your portfolio is great, nobody's gonna even look at the certificates. They're kind of like a nice to have, but you really need to show the work. I plan to finish this entire course, so parts 5, 6 and 7, in the next 2 weeks. So let me know in the comments if you'd like me to actually do weekly reviews of them, so each part would be a separate video, or should I just go over them all at the same time in about 2 weeks. And I also plan to talk to some larger companies that I had the pleasure to work with and ask them if they're gonna actually use this certificate in their hiring process and what they think about it. So just to see what your potential employers think of this course. So is it worth taking? Are there gonna be any benefits to having the certificate? Or just having a nice and big portfolio is gonna be enough, and still it's gonna be holding a lot more weight than certificates, courses, classes and everything else. So as usual, thanks for watching, don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video, and I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Cheers! This is where it all gets clear for the recruiters. You either know it or you don't know it. And if you just finished the course, your UIs are not gonna be great. Hi, let me tell you a secret. Most companies out there are looking for UX/UI designers, and given enough time, you should be able to fake your way through a pretty good UX case study. So you can create all those personas, all those user journeys, user empathy maps, and even the storyboards. But then comes the defining moment, the UI design. And this is one thing that you cannot fake. The rest of your case study can be pretty good because these are soft skills that are pretty easy to learn. But this one part is the defining moment of getting a job. In this video, aside from reviewing the course itself, I will show you my own examples, my own high fidelity designs, and also I will give you tips based on the most common mistakes that people made when I was reviewing their assignments. So if you want to really get better at UI design, stay until the end of the video. Let's go. So how is this part of the course? Well, a part of teaching you to ignore accessibility, do pretty mediocre hierarchy and very odd layouts, it's kinda good, but not really. So should you learn UI design from Google? You know, they created material design, which is proclaimed to be like the king of boring in UI design. Well, this is the part of the course which is the most exciting to me because I believe, and there's gonna be a video on it why I think so, but I believe UI design is like the biggest differentiator for digital products right now. Okay, so if we're gonna be reviewing high fidelity UI designs, we'll probably be looking at some images, right? And here comes Coursera to the rescue. So one annoying bug that I found is that you upload PNGs to the assignments. And the problem with that is that those PNGs are showing inline in that little field and they're pretty squished and pretty small. So if you want to assess them, you need to right click on them, save them to your desktop or just drag and save them. But many people, I believe, won't really do anything and they will just kind of lean closer to the screen and they will just judge them, you know, based on those little thumbnails. Because there is no save button, no download button, and nothing also happens on click. Okay, so this is a bad thing. Let's counter it with something good. So the good thing is that they are showing tutorial style videos from Figma how they're doing things. They're not super explanatory and they're not very step by step, but you could get the gist of what they're doing by watching them. And on a side note, if you want to play around with hierarchy, I made a short little video on that you can follow and you can play around with hierarchy even in your own Google course designs. That should be pretty helpful. Okay, so throughout this course, Google was praising accessibility, inclusiveness and all that. While this is of course very important for design to be good, the first thing that they did in their high fidelity design was to create an orange button with some white text on it. So I checked the colors and they don't pass any WCAG rules. So basically they are not accessible and they don't really follow any accessibility guidelines. I don't want to be picky because in my designs I sometimes do AA buttons as well, not AAAs. And I know that in many cases, if you just kind of let your creative juices flow, you might not be that accessible. But still, this is Google. This is a course teaching you to design with accessibility in mind, and then with their very first choice of color they go non-accessible right away. Then in the very next video, right after making that accessibility mistake, they actually tell you that accessibility is really important and they give you some links and some reading material on it. But yet they keep using that same color combo throughout the course. In one of their quizzes they also say that icons support a global audience and are widely understood by everybody, which is definitely not true because there are some icons in some cultures that are perceived completely differently, and we should be always using icons with labels because people simply don't understand icons the same way, and some people don't understand them at all. One example from our experience was making an app for farmers, and these farmers were asked during their usability study, what does the heart icon mean next to the product? And it was like next to a 6-pack of Coca-Cola or something. And they said that that means that that 6-pack of Coca-Cola is a healthy choice, a healthy option, because heart is something that is healthy. So yeah, not everybody understands the icons the same way. But then just a while later, in the very same video, Google mentions something that contradicts what they said before, because then they mention American football icon, you know, that kind of oval shape, is different than the overall worldwide football icon, which is like the soccer ball that they call it. So if you're making a product for a worldwide audience, you shouldn't really show the American football, but the other one. So they are kind of reversing from what they said a couple of minutes earlier in the same video. In setting up a grid, they mentioned columns and alleys, which is pretty weird because everybody in the industry has been calling them gutters for like a very long time now. And I don't remember hearing about alleys, so maybe it's some Google naming convention or something from some design tool, but everybody calls them gutters, so keep that in mind. Columns and gutters. They also show the more or less complete high fidelity design of the dog walking app, and I have a couple of problems with this, and yeah, that orange button still doesn't pass the WCAG contrast guidelines, but I want you to focus on something else. What does this button remind you of? Okay, so yeah, this button actually looks like a banner ad because of the shape and the proportion of it, and there's something called banner blindness, in which we are kind of so used to seeing advertisements everywhere, we are desensitized to them. So whenever we see a shape that resembles an ad, our head is kind of skipping it, so we pay a lot less attention to that shape, and this is like the most important thing on this screen. So this button shouldn't have a proportion of a typical banner ad, especially with the illustration on the right. It could actually be mistaken for a banner. The other thing is that the font sizes, especially in the list, are too small and a little bit too cramped together, so it's not really a readable look and it's not really a good looking part of the product. And I believe that if you're teaching people design, the more white space you show them, the better. So you don't really have to condense everything on the screen. You can even try going a little bit overboard in the other direction, because it's still better to show them that white space is important by overusing it a little than by underusing it, because a lot of the designs that I actually looked at suffered from that same problem. Everything was just so condensed it was difficult to read. And also, yeah, the fonts were pretty small. And actually, if this video gets 1,000 likes, I can redesign the dog walking app myself and do a live stream on it, just with your questions, suggestions and everything. So the part about spacing and white space is pretty well explained, but they don't really use many of these principles in their own dog walking examples. So it's kind of weird, because that example should be grounding you to the process, and instead, it kind of does its own thing. And then in the week after the white space chapter, they show a version of the dog walking app that actually has better white space, but it's not connected to the chapter on white space at all. And I think that this should be like really happening at the same time. They're teaching you about white space and they're applying it in their design, not applying it after the fact, you know, a week later, and then kind of reverting back to the previous version a week after that. It's a little bit chaotic and convoluted. And also in their app, they align the chevrons to the top of the cell, top of the list item, which is very weird for two reasons. So one thing is that chevrons are actually an iPhone pattern, so they happen on iOS, they don't really go on Android, and they're trying to design an Android app in most cases here. And the funny thing, they mention design systems, and of course they mention Material Design, the design system by Google, and to kind of counterbalance this, they mention Polaris from Shopify. And then they say that, yeah, there's some more design systems for you to explore. But in the videos, they never mention iOS, which is a very odd choice because, you know, iOS is pretty popular, iPhones are pretty popular, and even if the market share is not the same as Android, people are actually buying stuff more on the iPhones. So many startups and companies make the iPhone app as the priority, and then they add Android a year or two down the road. This is exactly what happened with Instagram, which was iPhone only for a couple of years. And this is what's happening with Clubhouse right now and many other apps. And given that as a designer, you'll be doing a lot of mobile apps, not mentioning the second biggest operating system at all and that it has its own patterns is kind of lame, because okay, I know they want to promote their own stuff, but it's kind of like really teaching you their own way and the only way. And you don't really design apps the exact same way for iOS and Android. Sure, they're merging a little bit visually, but there are still some patterns that are iOS only, and they don't even mention the name anywhere, I think. But the other thing is that they place the chevrons on the top of the cell, and then in some examples later, they move it right to the center of the cell, which is a more normal, more standard version of doing them. But this doesn't get mentioned anywhere, like why this chevron is even there, and why it's at the top, and then why it's in the center in the second version. So it's just basically added there, and you might even miss it completely. So if you're learning, I think the biggest problem here, apart from some accessibility issues, is the lack of continuity, because they are teaching you some patterns and some examples and some principles, but then the example app they want to show you to illustrate those principles sometimes doesn't follow them in that week, but then kind of adds them after the fact a week later without any explanation. So if you're following along, you don't really see like, here's how you do it and here is a direct example how it's done. sometimes the example just doesn't exist. And because of that messy, chaotic structure, I think it's gonna be a little bit harder to follow for beginners. In the scale and proportions segment, they say that these three icons have the same proportions, and well, the icons themselves maybe, but the shapes aren't really that proportional. You know that check mark at the end? It's a lot smaller visually, optically than the circles before that. And that actually makes it out of balance, and yeah, here's an easy fix on how you could make this better. Another naming convention that I found is that they call UI kits sticker sheets, and yeah, that naming convention might exist in some places, but it's not the most common one. So if you're looking for those sticker sheets in Google even, it's best for you to actually search for UI kits, because this is gonna be the query that's gonna get you a lot more examples. Okay, let's find something good about this part of the course. So the good thing is that they actually teach you about Gestalt principles a little bit after you apply typography and color, which is good because then you can actually try to move things away from each other to create those patterns and to create those layouts, you know, using proximity and similarity. So this is a good approach because you learn first to apply something badly and then how you can use the Gestalt principles to actually make it better and improve it. Okay, let's get to peer grading, my favorite part of this course. So this time I decided to review everyone. Like every assignment that I got, I reviewed it and I wrote some pretty good feedback, I hope, or pretty helpful. But I also noticed some patterns. And the reason for me to go and review everybody was to try and see how designers that had no previous experience in UI design are actually making those designs. And let me tell you this. They're not great. Because as I said at the beginning of this video, you can learn the principles and the soft skills, you can learn the research and write your personas and everything, but this one part, this high fidelity design, is where everything kind of stumbles and falls apart, because this is something you can't really fake. If you haven't been doing it for a long time, just one exercise and a couple of videos are not gonna make you a good designer. You need a lot of practice and a lot of time spent on this. So if you want to be a UI designer, this course is definitely not going to make you one. But if you continue after that, and if you do exercises on your own, like daily UI designs, you should get better in about 5 to 6 months. So looking at those high fidelity designs, I know that if I was actually hiring at Hype4 right now, we wouldn't really hire anybody from that course. So if you want to be the most valuable designer on the market, which is the UX/UI designer, a person who understands research, flows, information architecture, but then can also make the beautiful design at the end, you need to put in a couple more months after this course to be on a junior level even, because that's basically how it happens. You can't really fake it and you can't really do it with just one course. But don't worry, I won't leave you like that. Here are 3 biggest problems with examples of the main issues that I found while peer grading other assignments. So number 1, fonts and buttons are too small. And this is something that I've seen in pretty much every single one. So just keep your fonts 12 points at the minimum, and the optimal range for them is 14 to 16 for like the main body text, and then you can make the headings and titles a little bit larger. And the buttons should be at least 40 by 40. So if you're making a square button, make it 40 by 40, 44 by 44 is more optimal, and even 50 by 50 is still fine. If you go above 50, you might actually go into that banner blindness route, so I don't really recommend trying right now. But the buttons need to be big enough on a mobile screen to be comfortable to tap with your finger. If they're too small, they're not gonna be comfortable. That's easy. Number 2, stick to a sans serif font, and a very basic one at that. Because people try to be funky with their fonts and they try to make it kind of like an artistic presentation, but in reality, the first apps that you're gonna be making are really not about experimenting with fonts, because chances are you're not gonna do the right thing here. And by using Helvetica or something very simple and very generic, you'll have less chances to fail, basically. So just don't go overboard, don't use those crazy serif fonts or decorative fonts, because this is not the goal here. And number 3, colors are tough. It takes a long time and it's really difficult to pick the right colors. So don't experiment with like a pink background with green letters on them. If you're making your very first high fidelity design, choose a white background, a pretty dark text, not really black, but kind of like a dark gray, and then use just one color for the accent. You can pick blue or green or even orange that's a little bit darker. Don't try to kind of make it cool with a lot of colors just because you can. And once you get confident with those very simple basic colors, you can then try experimenting. But you know, in your first apps, don't really go overboard, because a lot of these try to do some crazy color combinations and some pastels and some like weird color choices. And I know that people just wanted to make it their own and they wanted to have like their own personal touch on them, but this is not the time for that, really. Just go along the safe path. And since we're still at peer grading, I noticed a couple people leaving me comments under my other assignments that they just reviewed mine and that I should go to this link to review theirs. And this is kind of, you know, forcing my hand, because if they reviewed mine and gave me a maximum score, then what should I do about theirs? It's kind of like a natural thing to give back. The entire second part of this course is actually repeating a lot from course number 4, just using those high fidelity designs as the base for research. They could have just said, okay, we got to the high fidelity mockups and the high fidelity prototype, then go back to chapter 3 or 4 and then just do that research again on those mockups with like basically all the same steps. But instead they just added again to kind of make the course bigger, I guess. So what did I think about this part of the course? Well, it does have some good principles and it does teach you a lot about Gestalt, and there's a lot of really nice reading materials, but it's not really gonna teach you to be a good UI designer, because that is something that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy of your own. And after this course, if you want to design UI, you really need to do daily design challenges for at least 50-60 days and probably more. So yeah, recruiters are looking at high fidelity designs first, then they read the case study, and then they go back to high fidelity designs. This is how our minds work, and most recruiters work that way as well. So if you're looking for a job, and if you don't have good quality high fidelity designs, chances are people are not gonna even read the case study. So if you want to get a job in the industry as a UX/UI designer after this course, you need to be prepared to actually do a lot more work, like months of work, months of extra work to polish those UI skills, because they're not gonna be enough just after the course. They're not gonna be enough to get hired or to even get noticed. And of course you can always apply to a UX designer or UX researcher role that doesn't do high fidelity, and some larger corporations might hire you for that. But most medium and small companies are not looking for designers who don't do high fidelity designs. So I know I might have shattered some dreams, but if you're dedicated and motivated and ambitious, you'll be fine. Because it's really about putting in the work every single day, and then after a month or two you'll start seeing progress, because that's how it happens. So if you put in that time, you're gonna be good enough to get hired, and then the rest of this course is gonna give you a solid case study to back your UI designs. Okay, hope that helped. Let me know where you are in the course in the comments, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next one. And obviously don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video if you liked it, and yeah, cheers. Hey friends, so welcome to part 6 of the Google UX course review. Apparently I'm on my way to becoming a fully certified UX designer after all these years, so yeah, nice. This part of the course explores web design, responsive web design and Adobe XD, which is gonna be a nice change after that mobile app in the previous part of the course. And of course, already having a mobile app, it only makes sense to have a website design, but then you can go, a step further. You can have like a smart fridge app or, just something out of the ordinary. I'm just giving you some ideas here. This part of the course, however, has a pretty weird structure because I have no idea why responsive web design in Adobe XD was grouped together in just one block with job searching, because basically that's what it is. The first 5 weeks of this part of the course are all about responsive web design, and then week 6 is completely different. It's not about designing anything, it's more about your portfolio, your case studies and job applying and whatever. But it is weird because I believe that job searching and understanding the industry that you're in is really important, because that's kind of like the knowledge that can land you the job, right after your portfolio. And grouping that together with responsive web design is kind of I don't know, it's just, I don't understand this completely. Okay, starting from the beginning. I really like how they explain all the different breakpoints or screen sizes and why it's actually important, because I actually noticed that a lot of junior designers, when they get a task of creating a mobile version of a website, they just take the website and kind of shrink it down to that size, but it's all like super small fonts, very unreadable, very unpleasant to look at. So you learn how to modify layouts to actually make them match the smaller size, and that makes sense because just shrinking them is not gonna cut it. Okay, Adobe XD. So this whole part of the segment is about teaching you another seemingly free tool to design called Adobe XD. But if you don't really like to use Adobe products like myself, or if you don't really want to install the Creative Cloud app that's running in the background and hogging resources of your laptop, you can still do all of those assignments and all of those exercises in Figma. And what is great that they actually kind of thought of that they don't really need to force you to use Adobe XD. You can use it, of course, to learn it, and it's pretty useful, I guess. But if you want to use Figma or other tool, you can still use it. There is some extra reading materials on how to do these exact same things in Figma. So you don't really have to use Adobe XD, it's just an option. And I think having an option is really great. The actual Adobe XD exercises aren't really that precise. So sometimes, especially if you're a beginner, you'll have to pause the video and really think about what happened on the screen. They tell you like, let's make a rectangle and let's change the color, but they don't really show you where it's done. And to some people that might be intimidating, and it might be actually taking them slower to follow. I liked, however, that they mentioned that design tools come and go and they gain and lose popularity. So it's all about learning how to use the design tool general principles. They're surprisingly similar, so if you learn one, you're gonna be fine with like a lot of them. Okay, let's get back to some naming convention. Remember columns and alleys in the previous video? Well, right now they're back to columns and gutters, but it turns out that alleys is a way that Figma is calling that. And I have no idea why is it so, because it's really not an industry trend. It's not an industry naming convention, so they're kind of breaking the rule just to, I don't know, mess with people or to make it harder. Oh, and sticker sheets are called UI kits, so kind of like I told you in the last video. Once again, in this part of the course, you choose a project from a randomized list generated by some colorful generator. And I picked a music selling and previewing website for a musician in Iowa. And I chose this because I actually finished high school in Iowa, so I felt like a connection with this particular randomized assignment, so I decided to just go with this. And at first, when I realized that you have to go through all that personas and empathy mapping and problem statements and everything all over again, I was like, oh, come on, that's pretty lazy of you, right? It's kind of like condensing the entire first 5 parts of the course into one and then adding some additional design exercises on top of that. And I think that this is leaning a little bit too heavily into the non-design aspect, so there's like a lot of ideating, thinking, writing, and really not a lot of designing, which is bad. But I think that it's also mostly made to reinforce the process in you. So you know that the UX process is something you follow to make those products, but in reality, many of these things, as I said before, are not really part of the process in like a typical workflow. And of course, I'm going through this course at a very fast pace, and for many people, it's gonna take a few months. So if you're just going back to course number 6 few months after you started, it's pretty good to actually refresh some of those initial things. So after all, I don't think it's a bad idea, but I really wish there was more actual hands-on designing here. Most of the quizzes in part 6 are actually a lot easier than in parts 3, 4, and 5, which might be good or might be bad. It depends on what you're expecting. Okay, now let's talk about the approach, and especially the approach that Google has towards scribbled paper wireframes. And I understand the idea because paper is something most people are comfortable with and it's pretty easy to start with, but those scribbled lines are not gonna cut it. This is not how the industry works, and there are a couple of reasons for that. But the main reason that those scribbly, kind of very low fidelity paper wireframes are pretty useless is that without having the text on them and without having the context, they're practically unreadable to everybody except you, and you yourself will also forget about all that stuff. So imagine yourself a week or two after you made those paper sketches. Do you still remember what that scribbled line there was? I wouldn't. So it's not really about completing the wireframe super fast and doing those scribbles to save time. It's about having a wireframe or a concept sketch that's gonna be understood by other people so you can communicate your ideas better. And if you only have scribbled lines and placeholders for everything, it's just not gonna be clear. And continuing on the subject of those scribbled lines, when you go digital, when you start to digitize your wireframes and start to using a design tool to make them, Google is also pushing lorem ipsum a lot. It's basically a placeholder. It's some words that don't really make any sense and people kind of use it to fill in the space with text. And while it may seem like a good idea, it's really not, because if you're making a wireframe and especially a high fidelity prototype, at some point it's gonna be the same thing as with the scribbled lines. You're not gonna remember what that second line of lorem ipsum meant comparing to the first line of lorem ipsum. So really you need some headers, you need some actual content on there. And I believe the good approach to this is actually to make stuff up. Because if it's a wireframe, you can just start writing semi-relevant things yourself to make it more real. And by making it more real, it's going to be a lot easier for you to process and to understand and to also come up with additional ideas. And when you see just a page full of lorem ipsums, it can be anything. And that's not really the goal of designing. Design needs to go from the vague towards the specific, and there is no specific with dummy text. Okay, I guess this is the moment that we've all been waiting for. High fidelity designs, right? And don't get me wrong, I know that these designs that they're making as part of the course can't be too polished. They can't look really like a dribble shot. They can't be too beautiful because that would be very intimidating to the beginner designers. So I get that. I get that it's not supposed to be super pretty just yet, and you'll get to the pretty when you get more experience. But still, there are some issues there that I don't understand and I want to mention them. The first thing is that they went with a very narrow gutter width. And this is bad because it actually enforces you to create little white space within groups of elements. Let me explain. The columns are used to place the content in, and then the gutters are used for spacing between the different types of content. So if like a photo of a book cover is taking 2 columns and then you have an extra 2 columns on the side for all the descriptions, you only have 1 gutter width to actually space them apart. And in many cases a very small gutter width is not gonna be enough because there's just gonna be too little white space between those 2 elements to look any good. And this is kind of what happened here. So text is just too close to the book covers and it doesn't look good, it doesn't look that readable. And in some places they actually ignore the layout completely, like here. And it's even more prominent in the very small objects on the screen, like small little sections where the distance between the sections is actually the same as the distance within the sections, and it really doesn't work. It kind of breaks the layout, breaks the structure and destroys the hierarchy because it's just all becoming one. So whenever you can, and if you're making a layout, go with gutters that are at least 24 points or even above that, because that will give your layout enough breathing, enough space to actually feel like a nice readable experience. And the choice of the heading font is also something I wouldn't really go with for beginners because, as I said before, if you're a beginner you should not experiment with fonts and colors. So if you're making an app or a website, use black, white and just one color, one accent color. Don't go crazy with colors. And same with fonts. There is a group of font that is considered safe. So no matter what you do, how big is the font, how thick is the font, it's still gonna look good. And these are mostly sans serif fonts for a reason, because they're simpler, they're more easy to actually place within any kind of interface and they're still gonna look good. So the more you deviate from that kind of simple structure of a font into something more decorative or something more fancy, the harder it is to actually make it well. And especially for beginners, you should really stick to the safe fonts. I mean it. So decorative serif fonts like the one used in this example are very easy to go wrong. If you pick a font like that, it can just backfire at you right away and break your entire layout. What I like is that they showed that all of the icons that you import into your artboards and use on your projects are actually very simple shapes. So some of the simpler ones like the back arrow or the X to close the window, you can actually use the standard shapes that you have in the design tools to make them. And this is great because making some of those simpler ones in place without having the need to actually go to external files and look for them is gonna save you a lot of time. The problem is that they show you how to do it with rectangles, and if you're making making simple icons like that, it's definitely better to use lines than filled rectangles, because with lines you can always increase or decrease the line thickness, so you can modify the icon a lot easier. And when it's rectangles, it's pretty difficult to modify. But aside from that little fact, I think that the fact that they showed you can do some little icons in place is great. So here's how you can make like a search icon. Just create an oval, a line, group it and rotate it 45 degrees. And in many cases, this is gonna take you less time than if you were to go into an external library and look for that icon. Okay, so what's the conclusion here? Let's start with this. Designing websites is a lot more difficult than designing apps. It's simply a lot easier to create a chaotic mess on a larger canvas. The more space you have, there is more places where things can go wrong. So while this part of the course is a pretty good start about understanding responsive design, how it works, where it comes from, and what are some good practices, you'll need to do a lot more designing on your own to be any good. And the most important aspects are covered pretty well here. So you'll get a solid foundation and you'll be able to not make a lot of the rookie mistakes. Just don't use the lorem ipsums and try to make your icons using lines and you'll be fine. So the sixth part of the course isn't bad, but as with all of the other parts, it's not gonna make you a designer. It's just gonna give you enough knowledge to explore on your own. But if I was looking at it from an employer perspective, I wouldn't hire people who only knew how to kind of modify responsive design a little bit but had no actual designing skills. It's always the portfolio that matters, the portfolio with like a lot of projects in them. So be ready to practice a lot, because after you get the initial understanding of responsive web design, there's still a lot of additional patterns, additional concepts, and additional differences between the different breakpoints that you can take into account, and this course only really covers the basics. Alright, thanks for watching, like, subscribe, drink a glass of water, and I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Cheers! Okay, here we are at last, part 7 of the Google UX course. Once again, this part of the course is divided into 2 parts. One is about creating your third portfolio project, and the other one is all about job searching, interview preparation, and all that. And just as a friendly reminder where we're at, here is a nice little Coursera bug again. So in the assignment upload screens, you have some blue buttons that you have to click to start the upload. But the distance from those blue buttons to the content on the top is practically the same as to the content on the bottom. So when there is a longer list, you don't really know which button is actually connected to which part of the text. And I actually noticed some people uploaded the wrong exercise into the wrong place because of that. And I know this is a pretty small mistake, this is a pretty small bug, but it does have some impact, and actually as designers I believe that you should be able to start noticing things like that because they are important. Little details is where it's at. So let's start with the third portfolio project, shall we? The idea for the third portfolio project is to design a product for the social good. And of course this is admirable, and of course it's also good because if you already created 2 regular products, for consumers in the first parts of the course, then the third one should be a little bit different, and the theme of it being different is actually a pretty good idea. And once again, they provide you with a randomizer that you can use to generate those social good ideas for you, but there is a small problem with that. A lot of these sentences don't really match each other, and yeah, it looks kind of weird. So instead I decided to pick my own project. I didn't really want to make a food ordering service made out of pets because I'm practically vegan anyway. So I had this idea because I'm very engaged with how clean the seas and the oceans are. I sometimes go to the beach with a plastic bag and collect all the plastic there. So I came up with an idea for an app that will give you rewards and points for collecting plastics. And I also assumed that the city would place like machines near the beach where you can get, scan the app and get like a plastic bag, and then at the end you can go there, put it on a scale, and then you can redeem the points based on the weight of your plastic, and you drop it off into a special container. And of course it's pretty far from reality, and machines like that would be pretty expensive, but it's okay to dream, right? So I started planning up the app and really hoping to get to some nice visuals for it, And then Google hit me with like this entire UX process all over again. So I had to do all the personas, affinity diagrams, competitive audits, and everything from scratch. And I get it, it makes sense to reinforce it all over again, because that kind of teaches people that every project needs an approach that has a lot of that UX process in it. It all seems a bit rushed though, because the last part of the course is only 5 weeks. And out of these 5 weeks, the last 2 weeks are dedicated to the jobs and portfolios and case studies and resumes and everything. So you only have 3 weeks to actually design the app, and a lot of that is actually quizzes. So there is, I think, only one peer graded assignment for the actual design that you're making. And it's not even high fidelity. So basically this part of the course is just to add another project to your portfolio using all the knowledge that you gained from courses 1 through 6. Now the second part of the course is a little bit more interesting, because finding a job and understanding how recruitment works in the UX industry and what you should do and how you should prepare is actually very important. And I still don't understand why they didn't actually create an extra segment with this. Like, this should be its own thing, not kind of added on top of the social good app design exercise. Because of that grouping of those two things together in one block, I think that it takes a little bit of the weight away from this job hunting, and it shouldn't. This should be its own thing, and it should be explained in a lot more detail. And the reason for this part of the course is obviously that many people finish the course and want to become a UX designer for the fame, the money, and the glory and the sports cars and everything. And of course you can't get that experience without getting a job first. So you need to get a job, and Google will tell you how. And speaking of Google, we already established that a lot of the stuff that they're teaching is kind of like them making their own future Google employees. So I found it actually pretty funny when they mentioned that you can use a search engine to look for companies to apply to. Like, they didn't say you can Google them, because that would be kind of like, I think, a little bit over the top. So yeah, you can Bing your future employers as much as you want. But right off the bat, I have to say that some of the tips in this part of the course are very good. And you should pay a lot of attention to what they're saying here, because this actually, combined with the portfolio, is gonna be what lands you the job. For starters, they identify the different types of job that you can have. So you can work for a very large company, and then like Google, a lot of these processes will be pretty similar to the ones in the course. But you can also work for smaller companies, design agencies, marketing agencies, or go freelance and work directly with clients. So yeah, potential employers can be different. There's not just one type of company that is hiring UX designers. There are multiple, and they stated very clearly that you should actually do some research and iterate on your portfolio to actually match the type of business you're applying to. Of course, for a larger company, a case study with like a super long text and a lot of the whole UX process is a must. And then for a smaller company, a lot of the UI examples with some foundational UX knowledge is gonna be preferred. So if you're applying to a smaller company, it's best to show that you're a generalist and that you can actually do the UI. Another thing that they mention is to also tell what you did wrong and what you could improve in your case studies. And I will add a little bit to that. I believe that, of course, it's really good to identify your weaknesses and show that you have the willingness to learn, but at the same time, they can't be too big, because of course this is still a negative thing. And if you're adding too much negative things to your case study or to your portfolio, it will actually affect the way that the recruiters are looking at it. So basically it's best to keep that section pretty small. It's good to show that you understand that design is something that you iterate on and that you always can improve something. But just don't go over the top with identifying your own mistakes, because in the end it's gonna undermine you, and that's not the point. The case study should be generally positive. It's actually worth mentioning that if you ever worked at like a typical office environment, and it doesn't have to be UX of course, but any kind of office, you know, with like an open space and a lot of people doing stuff on their computers, then a lot of those hiring processes are gonna be the same. They're gonna have a couple of extra things that are related to the UX part, but there's a lot of explanation of how the entire process works and how recruiters work, what are recruitment agencies, how interviews work, how they're conducted usually, and all that. And this is not only true for the UX industry. This is true for pretty much any kind of office work, The only difference is that for a UX role, you'll have to actually prove that you know what you're doing and show the portfolio. And from my perspective, I'm gonna point out two things that I believe that are very important if you're going to a job interview. So the first thing is that you need to research the company you're applying for. You need to know at least a little bit about them. You need to know what their products are. You need to know their marketing or their slogan, or just click through their website to just know where you're going, basically. We've had this problem many times, actually. Some young people showed up to a job interview at Hype4 and they had no idea what we're doing. The only thing that they were certain about is the amount of money that they wanted, but they didn't do any research. They didn't really see what kinds of products and services we offer, and it could show. It was really visible on those interviews. And this is like a pretty basic way to weed out the people that are not gonna fit the company. Because if the people are too lazy to actually do any research about the company they're applying for, and they just show up because they've seen, your job advertisement somewhere, then it's not gonna be a good fit. So yeah, do your research and understand the company you're applying for, or your chances are just gonna drop down to zero. And the second thing is to show any kind of ambition and dedication. And by that, I don't really mean that you're open to be working 12-hour days and weekends and all that. By ambition and curiosity and dedication, I mean that you are willing to explore other things outside of work to get better at what you're doing, because first of all, it benefits you, because you know more, you're more experienced, and then it benefits the company as well. So you can mention that you're trying to learn some interaction design, some very simple animations and transitions, and you're doing that on your own, because that shows that you're actually interested in the industry. So even before you become a UX designer, they can see that you really want to be a UX designer, that you want to know these things, and that you want to know these things because it's just fun to do these things for you. And of course, getting money for it is important, but if it's only about the money, it's very visible to the recruiters and the employers. So just show them that you want to be better at what you're doing, and that you're still learning, and that you have the willingness to learn. So you don't really accept just one position and then sit there for years. You want to grow and you want to be better and better. Bottom line is this: companies like ambitious people. Trust me on this. Okay, so what do I think about this entire Google course? Well, after that last part, I still think it's pretty good. It is very Google oriented, so it's practically training future Google designers, but if you take this into account and if you learn additional things on the side, you should have enough knowledge to land a job at a smaller company as well. But of course, the course itself is not gonna guarantee you a job. This course is gonna only give you a base to start from. And what it's also gonna give you is the ability to understand all of those UX articles and videos. So learning on your own after you finish the course is gonna get a little bit easier. And this is good and this is important because you'll have to learn a lot still. The knowledge from this course is just gonna make it a little bit clearer, so you'll be going through those extra materials faster. So should you take it? If you have no prior experience with user experience design or anything like that, I believe that this is a very good start. Just be aware that this is just the beginning and it's definitely not enough to land the job, unless you're like super lucky. But it's okay. It's a good course for general UX knowledge, for UX basics and UX foundations. And if you treat it like that, you'll probably get best results. So this is a good start, and if you're considering going into UX, it's also one of the cheaper courses out there. And will this course teach you how to design beautiful user interfaces? No. But don't worry, I'm actually working on my own course that's gonna do that for you. Okay, that's it for today. I'm gonna make another video interviewing some potential employers on what their take is on this course and on this certification. And these are gonna be pretty big companies, but I'm also gonna share a little bit of our own take on hiring. And what do we think about certificates, resumes, and what we look for actually if we're hiring somebody as a designer. So if you don't want to miss the video, subscribe and click the notification bell. And as usual, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this course in the comments below, and I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one.
And that's that. If you want to be a UX designer, you need to be aware that it's not as easy as it used to be a couple years ago, and that just doing the Google course is definitely not enough. If you're doing it just for the certificate, this is a waste of your time. You really need to be committed, and you really need to be sure that the UX industry is something that you want to be doing, because it's also not for everybody. To some people, it might feel a little bit boring, as it's not really that artistic as many people expect. I'm gonna link my full step-by-step guide on how to enter the industry in 2024 in the description of this video. But if you want to become a UX designer, right now the Google UX course is the best place to start. And as for you, you just have a beautiful day.